Are you a homeschooling parent, but you're not really sure how to get your child interested in sewing, or even not even sure where to start? I think that one of the things that I've noticed over my 15 years as an alteration specialist is that much of my generation don't sew. Somehow, in the generation above us, there was the gap. Many of our grandmothers sewed, but not a lot of the moms in between. And so, a lot of people our age don't sew. Those of us who have children, maybe toddlers all the way up to teens, it's very, very common for me to hear that you don't even know how to sew on a button, but yet it's so important to learn these skills, and I know that you want to pass them on to your children. So I've created this 3-lesson textile awareness series. It's not really that much about sewing, as it is really beginning to get into that mindset of learning that textiles are valuable and sewing is what keeps them in repair. And just that awareness of where things were made, how they were made, and the waste that are throwing these items in disrepair creates. And, it's so important because I feel like in order to want to sew, you need to understand the reason why it's meaningful. My friends say, I'm very much a purposeful person. And so if there's no purpose behind it, I'm not as motivated to do something. And so, from my standpoint, very much almost before you want to sew, it's like you have to recognize that there's purpose behind it. I mean, absolutely, it's a great thing to just want to learn to sew because you want to be crafty and you have that creative outlet. I mean, that is one of the reasons why I started, but it also is just such a meaningful life skill that will truly help your children and you save money and stop wasting things that you already have. So, my 3 main lessons are focused on textile awareness, basic mending, and just that awareness of what is cloth made of. As we move into the first lesson, there's a couple of objectives. As we move into the first lesson, one of the main objectives is just that awareness of what is in our home that is textile, what is in need of repair, and just before we can even move forward into the sewing, recognizing all of the things like bedding, curtains, clothing, lunch boxes, backpacks, all of these things that are textiles. And so when they're put together with fabric and stitches, and that is what sewing is. So rather than thinking of sewing as something that isn't related to our everyday life, this is so practical. It is everywhere. So many things that we touch all day long are textiles. And fixing them means that they're going to have a longer lifespan. So one of the activities in this first lesson is these charts that you can hand to your children that'll give them an ability to inventory their wardrobe a little bit. And as they go through their wardrobe, number one, it'll bring about the awareness of how many things they have that maybe they don't need. And I do think, right, we all go into a store and are attracted to something new. Yet when we really understand how much we have, that will hopefully begin to put a pause on that shopping mentality of I don't need more if I already have enough. And then next to the quantity, I want them to make note of whether the items are in need of repair. Again, this is about awareness. Does it need a new button? Is there a seam coming out? Is the drawstring coming out? Is there just a stitch that's unraveling? Being aware of what's broken is foundational to wanting to learn how to fix it. As you move into the second lesson, having some thread and needles around will be super helpful for the practical aspect, because this is in part some mending. Now, first, just being aware, okay, so what is wrong? Is it a seam that's coming out? Is it something like a button that's missing? Or is there an actual hole in the fabric of an item? So, of course, these will take on a little bit different methods of repair. I do have some instructions in there about how to begin to repair them. Also, if you follow along my YouTube channel, I have a lot more alteration tips, as well as on Instagram. I'm pretty active and I will at times post mending on there. But mending and learning just to have the ability to use a needle is so important. And I understand that, especially when you're young, learning to use a needle is challenging. I know last school year, I tried to teach a group of 20 4th through 6th graders in our homeschool co-op how to use a needle, and I did not quite realize how tedious that task was, because just threading the needle was challenging. But don't give up, because initially it is going to be a little bit challenging, but it's something that they can learn. I mean, I think about the stories you hear from like Laura Ingalls Wilder of how they learned to sew when they were very, very young, or they did like needlepoint. So it is a matter of practice and developing that fine motor skill and the muscle memory. So lesson 3 is really much more about cloth and textiles and the actual function of it, and the difference between, natural fibers that are going to break down and man-made fibers, and also recognizing where our clothes are made. So much of this is into the fast fashion industry. It's only the tip of the iceberg, but if we can begin to help our children understand that the production or the overproduction of synthetic fibers causes a tremendous amount of pollution, both in the manufacturing and in the waste, and how that affects third world countries even more than it does us here in maybe the US. I know I'm in the US, but depending on where you're watching from, and just the cost of labor and how the people that are making our clothes, especially in fast fashion, the clothing that is just getting whipped out, when you see it for sale for $5 a t-shirt, the person that made it did not get paid a decent wage. So a couple months ago, my daughter, who's 11, of course, since I'm a seamstress, she's learning to sew because that is high priority on my list, and she has quite the interest in it. But she made a jumpsuit, and we got into this conversation about just how much it would cost if she were to have bought it from a store. So just a baseline, we guesstimated that it might have taken her 6 hours to make it. And here in the US, again, it's about $15 an hour minimum wage. So even if she was making this to sell, we estimated that labor cost should be around $90 baseline. Because of course, yes, she is slower at it, but I do want to kind of at least put some type of dollar figure on it. And also, you want someone to get paid a decent wage to make your clothing, right? If you're not going to make it yourself. And then how much the fabric costs. And so the fabric, I think, was this about 3 yards we needed, and maybe we spent $10 a yard because I think we got it set on sale. So there's another $30. And so now you have a jumpsuit that's $120. Now, depends on where you shop. Definitely, you can go out and buy a jumpsuit for $120. But if we're used to either shopping thrift, which I am definitely a high proponent of because it does put something back into the life cycle rather than buying something new. But say if we're used to fashion shopping sales at Old Navy or Gap or Walmart, any of those, we're getting clothing for like I mean, t-shirts for under $10, jumpsuits probably for under 40. And when you actually think about the cost and time involved to make something, does it equate to a living wage? And recognizing, as your children or your students go through these charts, recognizing, well, where was our clothes made? Were they made in Bangladesh or India or Vietnam? And just to begin to have that conversation is so important as we think about, well, what are textiles, and how they impact our life, and how does our shopping habits also impact our lives, and really, what does sewing have to do with any of that? So I'm going to put links here to grab that those 3 lessons, as well as a coupon code, which is Textile 25. I'll put that in the show notes, but that'll give you a 25% discount on this item. And so thank you so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe and just follow along. I hope to continue building on having more and more content for you and for your children as I grow this channel.
Thank you for watching. You can shop tutorials and classes on my website, naomifeda.net. Be sure to like and subscribe. And as always, may God sow his love into your heart today.